Picture Lincoln, Nebraska in 1958. The streets smell like gasoline and fried onions. The hum of hot rods fill the air, and the cold winter wind will cut right through you. On one side of town, families are living the all-American dream. Neat little houses, white picket fences, and kids playing in the yard. But on the other side, things are different. Life's rougher, money's tighter, and the future doesn't feel as promising. But no matter which side of the tracks you're on, everybody knew about Runza Drive-In. It wasn't just a place to grab a meal, it was a ritual. Teenagers in Letterman jackets leaned against their cars, while the local greasers with their hair slicked back, leather jackets and cuffed jeans, revved their engines and blasted Elvis from the radio. Runza wasn't just food, it was Nebraska culture. A recipe brought over by German-Russian immigrants in the 1800s, it had become a staple of Midwest life. The perfect meal for a freezing night, the Runza Drive-In was the place to be, where kids gathered, couples flirted, and rebels were looking for trouble. And in the middle of it all, Charlie Starkweather and Caril Ann Fugate, a greaser with a James Dean complex, and his 14-year-old girlfriend, were about to find the trouble they were looking for.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
Hey, so we want to shout out Katie G, who bought us a coffee this week.
Thank you, Katie.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate you guys' support.
I'm thinking this year must be the year of delusional mothers with Casey Anthony on TikTok and Lori Vallow giving interviews.
Crazy town.
It is. What a gift, right?
Oh,
can you believe how narcissistic?
It is so mind-blowing. Just to hear them open their mouth and talk, and you think, do you really believe that people are buying what you say?
It's like they think they can just rewrite the history
facts.
And the facts. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Scott Peterson can start a podcast on relationships or something,
well, don't
right?
give him any ideas because he sure would try it, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah. It's disgusting.
It is disgusting.
Meanwhile, here we are, law-abiding citizens, trying to keep the lights on and maybe afford a cup of coffee without murdering folks. If you appreciate that about us, then do us a favor and leave us a 5-star rating, a review, and if you're feeling extra generous, buy us a coffee.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm going to get into the story, and I know this is going to be familiar to you. I'm sure that you have heard of this case, but hopefully I can tell you something that you don't know.
I hope so, yeah, because if I haven't heard of it, I'm going to feel like a really poor true crime podcaster.
Caril Ann Fugate. She was born on July 30th in 1943 in Lincoln, Nebraska, to her parents, Velda, or Betty, as some people called her, and William Fugate. From the very beginning, life was not easy for Caril. Her father was an alcoholic who struggled to hold down a steady job. When he did work, he painted houses, but he was far from a reliable provider or a good father at all. His drinking made him really unpredictable. He was abusive, charged with being a peeping Tom at one time, and racked up multiple public intoxication charges. So when Betty or Velda would hear him coming in drunk at night, she would grab her girls, Caril and her sister Barbara, and shove them into their closet, and they'd huddle up together, crying, scared to death, praying that he'd fall asleep or leave and wouldn't find them. Getting evicted from where they were living was a normal part of life. By the time she finished 6th grade, she'd already gone to 6 different schools. It isn't shocking that school wasn't her cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know, she struggled to keep up, and I can see why. Then her daddy was convicted for molesting a 10-year-old girl at the State Theater. And it was all over the papers, all over their school. Can you imagine how embarrassing that would be?
Humiliating.
He got a whopping 6 months in jail as his punishment. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So one day after he got home from jail, Velda sent Caril and her sister into the closet. They were living in a subsidized apartment on 10th Street. The girls heard screaming in the kitchen, and this time they ran out. and William had his hands around their mother's throat with her head laying flat on the kitchen table. So Barbara, Caril's big sister, she grabbed a butcher knife and Caril grabbed a hammer, and they let him know those days were over and he had better let go of their mom.
Oh, brave.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they were very young.
Yeah. It takes a lot of courage to do what they did.
It does.
For their mom.
So he finally left. About a week later, he came back, got some clothes, and left again. Velda filed for divorce on October 16th of 1950, and it was finalized on February 20th in 1951. The judge, of course, gave her custody of her girls and ordered William to pay $50 a month for child support. Velda had been raised real poor herself. She came from a rough family. Her mom actually lived in those apartments as well. And now she's having to go on welfare with her girls. During that time, though, one of her caseworkers noted that both of her girls were very attractive, mannered, normal, and had a good relationship with their mother. The three stayed in that apartment. They couldn't afford to leave. Velda was actually only 30 years old when she was divorced, and I was really surprised by her picture. She was beautiful. And not so surprisingly, it wasn't long before she caught the eye of a man named Marion Bartlett. She was 30. He was a 56-year-old World War II vet. He was much older than Velda, but he was steady and dependable. Unlike William, he didn't drink. He was strict. He didn't believe in sweets for kids and sodas. He felt like it would rot your teeth out. Of course, he didn't have any kids. So a lot of people who don't have kids, it's easy to be strict with them. He worked hard at nights as a watchman for the Watson Brothers Trucking Company in Lincoln. He and Velda would marry on March 26th of 1954. And for the first time in her life, Caril had some stability. The family moved to 924 Belmont Street. In a poor neighborhood where money was always tight. There was a dirt road in the front of their house, and up until 1958, they had to use an outhouse in the backyard.
I was just going to say, I know how that is. I've had to do that myself before.
I've never.
Oh, you never have?
Never. No, thank God.
Yeah. I never lived in a house without plumbing, but I had an aunt and some cousins who did. And one time my mom was separated from her husband, and we stayed with them for a while, and they had an outhouse.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not pleasant.
Her stepfather did what he could. He rigged up some plumbing so that they could finally get him an indoor toilet.
Good.
Yeah, poor girls. But the house itself, it was basically one of those tar paper shacks. My G-Pa lived in one of those. And the floors, they're covered in uneven linoleum that he tried to lay himself, that kind of thing. They hung sheets to divide rooms, and they had clotheslines up in the house, which I get that because it was cold in Nebraska, very cold in Nebraska. They didn't have a washing machine, so Velda had to scrub their clothes by hand. Their backyard, it was so junky that they had to actually lay down wood to get from the driveway to the back door without stepping on something sharp.
Oh, no.
No air conditioning, no phone, and not much else, but this still was a step up for Caril.
Wow. Just think about that.
This was a blessing to her. She felt stable here. Back then, I think families just made do with what they had. Marion hunted for meat. They raised chickens. In fact, that was his little side hustle, was selling eggs.
He had that one today. He'd be doing pretty well.
He would. Yes, he would. Velda, she stayed home and cared for the family. And Caril was a big help to her mother, especially when a new baby joined the household. In 1955, Velda and Marion welcomed Betty Jean. She was beautiful.
Aww.
I can't wait to show you pictures of her. She was absolutely beautiful. She had curly blonde hair, just gorgeous. And this is Marion's first child. Velda had already been a mother to Barbara and Caril, and she loved them. She really did. But I think those early years had been so tumultuous with William that it had been hard to experience
the joy.
Right. And so this time things were different, and everybody turned their attention to that baby. I think it was like when we had Lily. Lily was everybody's baby. Life just became about Betty Jean. When Caril would walk through the door after school, that little girl would go running up to her big sister. She loved her. And at 13, Caril went to Whittier Junior High School in Lincoln. Her classmates remembered her as friendly enough, but she liked to cuss. She cussed a lot. She wore breeches.
Oh.
Yeah, and men's shirts and little majorette boots.
She was pushing some boundaries.
She was considered probably unladylike, and some maybe would have thought she was a little bit trashy. This is the 50s. Think of The Outsiders.
Yes. Yeah.
She came from the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah. She wasn't one of the socias.
She was the greaser. Her and her sister Barbara, they'd always been close. As teenagers, they still shared a bed. They looked out for each other. And little Betty Jean, their sister, pretty much best friends. Wherever Barbara and her boyfriend Bob went, with Caril, she would always tag along. One evening, Bob showed up at the Bartlett house with his good friend Charlie Starkweather. Does this sound familiar?
This does sound familiar. I know where this one's going.
He wanted Caril to go with the four of them to see a movie on a double date. And when Charlie laid eyes on Caril, it was all over for him. He thought she was beautiful. She had this dark brown hair that she wore in a ponytail. She looked and acted much older, but she was only 13 years old. She was opinionated, would cuss, and if she didn't like something, she had no problem letting it be known. And Charlie ate it up. He loved every bit of it. And Caril liked him. She was drawn to him. He was older. He was that bad boy type of guy. He fit the part. He was a known troublemaker who drove a hot rod, which of course she thought was super cool. Charlie idolized James Dean. He dressed like him, wore his hair like him. Caril, she ate that up.
Right.
So they filled this need for each other. She was interested in his old wild made-up stories about being the leader of a gang. And she didn't mind that he was short and bow-legged. In fact, she told him that she loved it, that it made him stand out and made him different. She loved his fiery red hair. And most of all, she loved that he made her feel like she was the only girl in the room. She would later say that she'd always wanted to be somebody's number one. He bought her gifts. He even let her drive his car. Like when he would go to work, he would drop it off at a spot for her so that she could go get it and drive it home.
Okay.
I don't think boys did that very much back then.
Yeah.
Boys don't do that much now.
True.
For Charlie, she was the first girl who'd ever really looked at him like he mattered. He came into the world on November 24th in 1938. He was the third of 7 kids crammed into this small apartment in a poor section of Lincoln, Nebraska. And this was right as World War II was beginning. So his dad, Guy Starkweather, was a good-looking man, but he had been beaten down by life. He had finished the 8th grade. He worked for a while as a baker, then a handyman. But by the time Charlie came along, his arthritis kept him out of work more often than not. And Guy was also a drunk. But he wasn't violent like William had been. I think he did come to blows with Charlie a time or two, but even Charlie would later speak highly of his dad. I think it was out of character for his dad. And as unpopular as this is, Charlie might have deserved it.
Yeah. Sometimes you have more than one rooster at the hen house and they have to come to an understanding.
Come to Jesus meeting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But to Charlie, those early years, they weren't hard. They were perfect. He had these woods surrounding his childhood home. And he loved being outside. He loved nature. He said he remembered feeling like he lived in an enchanted forest. He was poetic. He actually was a pretty good writer. He would talk about how the evening sunset was like the color of a sky on fire, how he remembered the way the birds sang. And he grew up, he always loved to hunt, but he said sometimes he had such empathy that he couldn't shoot and he would just watch.
Makes me think of Pony Boy.
I know. Pony Boy Curtis.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That was before he felt like the world had turned against him, though.
And that hardens a person.
Yeah. Charlie, he was a little feller. And I already told you, he would actually, even as a full-grown man, he was only about 5'4". He was short. He had freckles, bright red hair. He was bow-legged, like severely bow-legged. He had a lisp. He couldn't pronounce his R's correctly and was just such a target for bullies.
Oh, it sounds like it, yeah.
Not only that, he could hardly see at all, was nearly blind, and so had to wear these thick glasses. On top of all that, he had a horrible stutter.
Oh, poor kid.
He got hit with all of it. The kids would call him the bow-legged, red-headed woodpecker.
He did have a lot to overcome.
He was mercilessly bullied. They said that he was always alone. No kids would ever play with him. They laughed at him, taunted him. They would hit him, just sucker punch him, that kind of thing.
So sad.
Later, he would write about an incident when he was walking home one day at school. His teachers noticed that he was artistically talented. And so one of his teachers had given him a set of watercolors. And Charlie loved his mother, always did. Even as an adult, he always loved his mom. And so when he got those watercolors from his teacher, he painted something for his mother. And so one day he's walking home when these bullies start chasing after him and laughing and, of course, calling him all the names. They grabbed his paper and first make fun of him and then rip it up. And when Charlie started to cry, that made things worse. In fact, that day they chased him so hard that he almost got ran over. They almost chased him into a vehicle, and that didn't make him feel sorry for him. It just made it worse. So by the time he gets home, his dad can tell something's wrong, and he let him cry, and he listened to him. And his dad had already gone to the school and tried to talk to the administration, but they're just, oh, boys will be boys, that kind of thing. And so his dad, after he let Charlie get everything out, he looked at him and he said, next time they start picking on you, knock the devil out of them. He said, you're not going to get in trouble from us. And from then on, that's what he did. That bullied little boy became the bully. He started hanging out at the gym, lifting weights, getting strong and fighting every chance he got. And he was good at it. He turned things around for himself.
Yeah. It's, a mechanism of survival.
Yeah, right.
Either that or continue to be bullied. So
he did what he had to do.
Yeah.
Up until this point, you can almost I'm like, good for him.
And I know when I used to work at the Y, I met more than one person there, guys usually, who got into bodybuilding for that very same reason.
Yeah.
They were getting bullied, and so they started going to the gym and building up.
Right. So that they can protect themselves because bullies, they know who they can target.
Exactly.
He later wrote that after years of relentless bullying and being left out, something in him shut down and he just turned inward. And he said what grew, it wasn't sadness, but it was a deep bitterness and like an all-consuming hatred. Even into his teens, when he became more athletic, he was still made fun of. And people, of course, they did it more discreetly because he beat the crap out of them. Oh. You know how kids are. But he had a friend that said, I'm trying to think of the words he used. He said, Charlie, if he liked you, he was very protective and he was good. And he said, but he had a real mean streak. And he did things like when he would get them down, he would kick them. And it was just like shocking.
Yeah.
How he was.
It sounded like too, like when you said he was getting hardened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He definitely was. So as a teen, he had a reputation as a troublemaker. And he said that girls were even meaner to him than guys. I think that's probably because they could taunt him maybe and know they could get away with it because he probably wouldn't hit a girl or they didn't think he would hit a girl. And so...
Or maybe he just perceived it that way because he was not very self-confident around girls.
That's true. That could definitely be it. But I think that made then meeting Caril and having her like adore him the way that she did meant more to him than we could probably imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
So before long, Charlie was practically living at the Bartlett house, pulling up in his 1941 Ford, hanging around Caril, hanging out until Caril would get permission to go out. And it didn't take long before they were officially going steady. Their evenings were spent out when Charlie had money, or they'd hole up in his room when they didn't. Caril would read comics, and he had this thing where he had this hunting knife, and he would throw a knife just in the wall over and over again. And so he would do that while they talked. By then, Charlie had been kicked out of his parents' house. He and his dad had gotten into a huge fight, and Charlie had stormed out. He moved into his own apartment on North 10th Street, which is actually where Caril used to live before her mother had remarried. And Caril's grandmother still lived there.
Okay.
And also, her sister got married to the Bob guy, and those two lived over there.
Okay.
So, yeah. Caril's stepfather, Marion Bartlett, hated Charlie from the start. He did not like him.
I'm not surprised because you already said he was really strict.
He was. And he thought he was just too old for Caril, and he was a braggart, and he just didn't like him. He even accused him of getting Caril pregnant several times.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. But Caril's mother, even though she wasn't a huge fan, actually defended her daughter's choice and said she's 13, and I don't feel like we can tell her. Times have changed for sure, but she said she didn't feel like she could make that decision for her.
Oh, at 13, I would be making that decision.
Oh, me too. Now, the Starkweathers, they did not hate Caril, but they didn't like the way Charlie had changed since he had started seeing her. They felt like he was different after meeting her, like she had some kind of a hold on him. He'd become disobedient and argumentative with his parents, which he'd not really been before. He had issues in the outside world, but was always close with his parents and with his siblings. And he started fighting with his brothers, which was just new. And his mom said it was just like he had just stopped caring for his family. Now, sometimes mothers can perceive those kinds of things when everything stops revolving around them and it revolves around a girl.
Yeah, especially that first girl that comes around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be a hard transition. So I don't know. Do you think that's normal?
I think it's probably a little bit of all of that. And maybe she was feeling that a little bit. But during those times when you had all those kids, she probably didn't have a lot of time to be worried about that. She probably just noticed a change in his personality, which sometimes does happen when you have a significant other. And she probably just didn't care for his new attitude. That's my opinion.
Okay. So Charlie dropped out of school after the 9th grade and worked as a stock boy at the Western Newspaper Union, hauling paper and loading trucks for $45 a week. Now, out of that, he gave $15 to his mom, and he had to pay his rent and spent the rest on Caril.
Wait, so he wasn't living at home, right? But he's still giving his mom $15 a week? Okay.
In September of 1957, he was letting Caril drive. She backed up without looking and hit a car, which sent her crashing into another car.
Oh, gosh.
And Charlie's dad was livid.
Yeah, I bet.
And that ended with a big old fight between him and his dad. And they say that Guy pushed him so hard that he went flying through the front window. He told him to get out and not to come back. And him and his dad, they would end up making up, but he never, ever went back home. And I think before that had been like back and forth, but that was it. As rough and tough as Charlie might have been, even he sometimes was shocked by Caril's sharp tongue. He would say later that she used language in front of her mother that he would have never used in front of his.
Wow. Her mom must have been permissive if she's using that kind of language, and then she thinks she can make her own decisions on her boyfriend at 13 years old. She must have been maybe compensating for their dad being so rough or something. I don't know, but
yeah. I think she grew up rough.
Yeah.
And she did have a mouth on her. Classmates said that she used words they'd never even heard before.
Man.
One friend who used to walk home with her after school said that she'd go on rants about how much she hated some of her teachers. And one time she even said she'd kill one of them for keeping her late. But yet, one of her 8th grade teachers described her as cute and said that she had adjusted as well as she could to junior high and had perfect attendance. She had friends, and she always tried to do her best. She had, I think, like dueling personalities. You know what I mean? She might have talked big behind their back, but I think she tried to do the right thing. An electrician working at their house was shocked because he listened to Caril cuss her stepdad out one day because he wouldn't give her money so that she and Charlie could go to the state fair. And yet she was wonderful with kids.
She's a study in, what's the phrase? I can't remember.
I don't know. Is it a paradox when?
Yeah.
Like a great,
yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah. At just 13, she babysat 5 kids, a lot of afternoons for Virginia and Sonny Von Bush, sometimes from 4 to 9:30 p.m. She would cook, clean, she bathed the kids, she put them to bed, and the kids adored her. Even years later, Virginia would say her kids still loved Caril.
Oh, that speaks highly of her.
Yeah, it does. And Caril and Charlie, they were inseparable. Like I said, some evenings they'd stay at his place. Other nights they were out cruising Lincoln. They went to movies or out to Pioneers Park where they'd watch buffalo, horses. They would go to the Runza drive-in on their way back. Caril thought Charlie, like he was just the coolest guy out there. And of course, he loved that about her, that she thought his guns were cool and his ability to fix his car and just the way he handled himself. She'd cheer when he raced his hot rod on Capitol Beach. One Sunday, he was the last car running, and he won $25. So he took Caril out to a fancy steak dinner to celebrate. But being with her and loving her did not take away his hatred. And he said, if anything, it might have fed it. Caril was young, and she wanted things that Charlie couldn't always give her. She was very childish in a lot of ways, I believe. And when she didn't get her way, she knew how to push, just like she did with her stepdaddy, cussing him out when he wouldn't hand over money. I imagine she let Charlie have it a time or two. Mm. But Charlie wasn't some grown man with a steady paycheck. He was barely scraping by. He had rent to cover. He had bills piling up, a paycheck that never stretched far enough. Caril had a lot of wants. Charlie loved her, and he wanted more than anything to keep her happy. And so he always gave her what he could. And when that wasn't enough, when money ran out and pressure built up, it just added to weight he was already carrying. And then he started having visions. Oh. Charlie said that he saw death, and death talked to him. He said, I don't know how it was, but I would wake up and see her standing there in the window. And all I could see would be the part from the waist up. It was half human and half bear, only it didn't have no neck. It just tapered off. It just tapered off from a big chest to a small pointed head. It didn't have no arms, and it didn't have ears. It talked to him in ways that only he could understand. It would tell him, don't be in no hurry. I won't let you forget. And sometimes it didn't just come in dreams. For a minute or two, he wouldn't be able to move his arms or legs. And then there would be a coffin. He said, one time death come to me with a coffin and told me to get in. Then the coffin sailed away with me in it till it came to a big fire, and the coffin just melted. I was down there on the street with these great flames of fire on each side of me, but it wasn't hot like I'd always thought hell would be. Instead, it was more like beautiful flames of gold, and then I woke up. He said that in that moment, he knew that he was going to die, and he knew that he was going to kill, and he wasn't afraid, and he accepted it.
That sounds demonic.
It sounds very demonic. November 30th in 1957, it was a freezing cold day. Charlie had gone to the Crest service station, and while he was in there, he saw this little stuffed animal that he'd wanted to get for Caril. So he went to the clerk, and this clerk, he's brand new on his job and had been there just less than a month. And Charlie asked him if he could get this bear on credit because he's wanting to get something for her. He ain't got no money. And he said, I better not because I don't want to get in trouble. And so Charlie left and he drove to Sonny Von Bush's house. He took a 12-gauge shotgun from Sonny's garage. And then later that night, dressed in cowboy boots, black jeans, and a black shirt, he pulled back into the Crest service station at around 3:30 a.m. He went inside and he bought a pack of Winston's and some gum. And then he walked out and he left again. A few minutes later, he turned back around, went back inside. But when another car pulled into the station, he left again. Just parked off to the side. He put on a hunting cap, these brown leather gloves. He reached under the seat for the shotgun and walked back into the station. He shoved a canvas money sack toward the clerk and told him to fill it up now. And the clerk gave him everything in his pockets and everything in the register, but he was so new that he didn't have the combination to the safe and he had no idea how to open it. Oh. So Charlie forced him out of the gas station into his Ford and made him drive to Superior Street, which was this kind of a deserted stretch of road. Charlie ordered him to stop the car and to get out. This is Charlie's version. So he tried to grab the shotgun, and before he could, Charlie cocked the gun and shot him in the right side of the head. He fell, but he wasn't dead. He was trying to push himself up. And so Charlie chambered another round and fired, and this time, of course, he's dead. By morning, Charlie was at home asleep. And after that shooting, Charlie felt different. The dark cloud that had followed him all those years, he said it felt like it was gone. It was lifted. The headaches, they were gone. And I don't know, it was like that murder had reset him or something, and not in a good way.
Yeah, it's like he stepped fully into the dark.
Yes, exactly. A criminologist would later say that it was more than just a murder, that the old Charlie Starkweather died that night. The clerk that was murdered that night was Robert George Colbert. He was a young, clean-cut, and innocent-looking man, just 21 years old. A few months out of the Navy, newly married, and expecting his first child. He had been working at the Crest service station for just a few weeks trying to make ends meet. The cops desperately searched for the killer. There was a physical description given to the police, but Charlie had never been arrested before, and so nobody really put two and two together. And I often wonder if he told Caril about that murder, as close as the two of them were.
Probably.
Yeah.
I think so.
It's hard for me to imagine that he wouldn't have, but then I wonder if she would even believe it if he did, because I think he had a habit of lying.
She may have thought he was just trying to make himself sound big and cool.
I thought even if he did tell her, she probably wouldn't believe it. So what little money he got from the robbery, somewhere between $160, didn't go very far. By January, Charlie was working as a garbage man with his older brother, Rodney, and he absolutely hated it. Just felt like it was beneath him. The only upside was that he usually got off in time that he could hang out with Caril. By now, him and Caril, though they were having some problems, according to her, she said that on the 19th, she had actually told Charlie not to come over anymore. And I'll go into why. She said that she went and got her mama and said, make him leave. I don't want to see him anymore. Remember, she's 14 at this time. And the reason I believe her is because Charlie believed that her sister Barbara and her now husband Bob wanted Charlie and Caril to break up because they wanted to set her up with another boy, another friend of Bob's. And that may have been true. She's 14.
Right.
She just might have wanted something different. And she said, you know, he was a braggart. He was all these things. And I think he might have been getting old to her.
Mm-hmm.
And she might have just been like, oh, that boy's cute. She's a kid.
Yeah. 14.
And said she was beginning to think he was crazy.
I'm sure some of his other behavior patterns were showing up. So she may have been getting a little bit leery of him as well.
Exactly. And the thing that I want everybody to keep in mind throughout this story is that she is 14 years old. If I told you the stuff that I did and thought at 14, you would think I was crazy too. And I was at 14. On January 21st, Charlie had plans to go hunt with Marion, her stepdad, which they'd made those plans long before the breakup. And who knows, because according to Charlie, now he says they weren't broke up.
Okay, so he didn't see it as a breakup, but she did.
Yes.
Okay.
He didn't say they were broke up. On Tuesday, on the 21st, Charlie went down to the Bartlett home at about 1:30 in the afternoon. Caril was still at school. You got to understand there are some varying stories from this point on. Things that he says and things that she say are going to differ. He says she was home. She was not home. Okay. She absolutely was not home. The friend that walked her to and from school that day, the teachers at school, the principal, there were just too many eyewitnesses.
Okay.
So he went down. Caril was still at school, and Velda and Charlie had gotten into an argument over Caril. This is his first account.
It's going to change.
It's going to change, but his first account is that they had gotten into an argument over Caril. She told Charlie not to come see her anymore. Then Charlie, he didn't say what it was, only that he said something Velda didn't like about Bob Von Bruck, which was Caril's sister's husband. Mm-hmm. He says that she hit him about 3 times because he said whatever it was that he said. He says, and she hit me about 3 times because he said that they had been wanting Caril to break up with him. Whatever he said must have been bad. And if it's even true, because then he claimed Velda slapped him 3 times. I'm saying if that part is true.
Okay.
I do believe they got into the argument, but I don't know that she slapped him. Because like I said, everybody did something. He had to have a reason for every single person that he did something to. He said that he got so mad that he hit her back. And she started hollering really loud. And then Marion came in there and hit him. Who knows if they even had plans to go hunting that day? Do you know what I mean? I believe he went to the gas station just to kill that boy. He says no, he was just going to rob him. But he grabbed the gun. And now he's just going over there because him and Marion knew that they had plans to go hunting that day.
Had they ever hunted together before?
I don't know.
Probably.
But do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So he hit her back. She starts hollering. And then Marion came in there and hit him. Charlie said he grabbed his gun and shot Marion first. Velda came out with a knife. And so he had to shoot her too.
Oh, he had to.
When poor little Betty Jean starts screaming and crying, right here, I do want to give a warning. This is hard to listen to. When she starts screaming and crying over what she had just witnessed, because she's almost 3 years old at this point, Charlie beat her in the head with the butt of his gun and then stabbed her in the throat. He then reloaded his .22 just in case anybody were to show up. He picked up Betty Jean because she was bleeding a lot and set her in the sink. He just laid her there. He grabbed the clotheslines hanging up in the living room, cuts him down, and ties Velda up and wraps her in a blanket. Then he wraps Betty Jean in a blanket and laid her inside a grocery box that's half full of garbage. He took them both out to the outhouse and left them there. He even put Velda's head down into the seat.
What a horrible thing to do. What a monster.
What a monster. Then he dragged Marion's body into the kitchen where he wrapped him in a sheet, layered it with building paper, tied it up like a package, and hauled him out to the chicken house. He wiped up the mess, and that was that. Caril came home at 4 o'clock that afternoon. For sure. Her friend walked her to the door. Whether she knew what happened or not at that point, it all depends on who you believe. She says that when she came home, he told her that some of his friends, like a gang of his friends, and he had told her about this gang that he was a part of, that they were holding her family hostage, and that if she wanted to see him again, that she'd better do as she was told. And so she said that's what she did. She said that she believed that she was saving her family's life and her life because he was holding a gun on her. She lived in the house with Charlie, we know this, for 4 days. According to him, they're living as if they're married. They did whatever they wanted. They watched TV. They played cards. They ate ice cream, potato chips, drank Pepsi, had sex. And he would later say that those were some of the happiest days of his whole life. She said she was scared to death, but did what he told her to out of fear. People kept coming to the door knocking, asking about the parents. Now, Caril did keep coming to the door, she said, because that's what she was told to do, and Charlie held a gun on her. She would answer the door, and she told him that her whole family had the flu and that they were too sick to come to the door. That worked for a little while. Marion's boss showed up with another man. He wanted to know if Marion would be back at work. Caril sent him away. Charlie's sister, Levita, came and knocked twice, and Caril sent her away. Barbara and Bob, her sister, they pulled up in a cab and were wanting to see Caril. They had their baby with them, and she met him at the door and told him to stay away, that the family had the flu. A few hours later, Bob came back, and this time with Rodney Von Bush, and Caril lied and said, "Hey, everything's fine, just go away." She then wrote a sign that said, "Stay away, everybody is sick with the flu." She pinned it to the screen door with bobby pins. And then Pansy Street, which is her grandmother, came, and she said she could tell something was wrong with her granddaughter. Something was not right. She knew something was wrong. She hollered out for Charlie Starkweather. They called him Chuck. She's, "I know Chuck's in there. And you tell him that if I don't find out what's going on with my daughter, that I'm calling the cops." And so at that point, Charlie knew that they were going to have to get out of there. So Monday, January 27th in 1958, not knowing where to go, Charlie remembered his old friend, 70-year-old August Meyer. Now, this was a really good family friend. He'd always been really good to Charlie, allowed him to hunt on his land, and he'd even taken him hunting. He'd been like a grandpa to him. Charlie really did like him. I believe that. He would visit him. He loved to hear him tell old war stories. Yeah, he went over there pretty often and just hung out with him. The 70-year-old retired farmer spent a lot of time piddling around at the farm. He had spent his entire life on that farm in East Bennett. He had never married, but he stayed so that his mom could continue to live there throughout her life. And so August would keep livestock, horses and cows. He cut firewood. He loved the Lord. He was a faithful member of Trinity Lutheran Church near Walton. He took pride in his property, just kept everything neat and orderly. He was real good about sharing his land with other people who wanted to hunt, which is actually how he got to know Guy Starkweather and his boys. And Charlie's one of his boys. So Charlie and Caril, they were going to make their way up his driveway, and their vehicle got stuck. And so they ended up having to walk the rest of the way. Charlie had his gun with him and was going to ask about going hunting. And as they were walking up, his dog starts barking like Rufus does when you come up.
Yes.
And like Attica, is that when I come up?
Same thing, yeah.
Mr. Myers, he's walking behind the dog, and he greets Charlie. And so Charlie told him he'd gotten stuck and asked if he could get a couple of horses or a horse to help pull his car out of the mud. So Mr. Myers was like, sure. And he's walking toward the barn with his dog. Charlie and Caril were following him into the barn. And when he got to the entrance, Charlie pulled out his gun and shot his friend in the head with a sawed-off .410 shotgun.
He's obviously way far gone.
Yes.
And way past any conscience.
It's evil.
Evil. Yeah. Pure evil.
Without a lick of emotion, he drags his body into the wash house, shuts the door, and turns around and shot his dog. He said that nonstop barking had just gotten on his nerves. Then him and Caril went into the farmhouse where she sat in the kitchen while Charlie ransacked the upstairs bedroom. Now, it's interesting too. You always have to pay attention. Just pay attention to what she's doing during all of these things. The same day at about 4:30, Bob, Caril's sister's husband, and Rodney Starkweather, which is Charlie's brother, they went back to the Bartlett home because Rodney was worried. He knew that he had that gun, and so everybody just knew something was not right. So they start looking around the place, and they found the bodies of Marion in the chicken coop, and then the bodies of Velda and Betty Jean in the outhouse.
Gave me cold chills.
Yeah. And so an alert is put out for Charlie's Ford by the Lincoln Police Department. At around 5:40 p.m., Charlie and Caril went back to their car to try to push it out of the mud. With the help of a nearby farmer, they got it and drove it back down to the Meyer house. Caril, she tried to rest, but she was scared. She said she got a spooky feeling being there. She felt like somebody was watching them, and so they ended up leaving. And when they did, they got stuck in the mud a second time. And so Charlie, and Caril decided to leave the car and just walk. At around 7:40 that night, 17-year-old Robert Jensen and 16-year-old Caril King were riding around together. They were high school sweethearts in their junior year at Bennett High School. Robert Jensen had gone through a lot in his 17 years. As a little boy, he'd contracted polio and overcome it. But he also suffered from terrible bouts of pneumonia, which would leave him bedridden as a child. 2 of his brothers had died of childhood illnesses, but he was 17, alive, and happy as could be. He loved practical joking, to laugh, and he just had this appreciation for life. His mother, Pauline, would say, "We watched our son come through all those things with never a word of complaint, only concern for the ones of us who worried over him." She said that he developed into a cheerful, loving young man who only saw the good in people. And that's what they were doing. They were trying to help this teenage couple that night.
Yeah, which makes it even worse.
It does. Caril King, she was a cheerleader who was beautiful and smart and kind, but she'd also experienced loss. Her father, Russell, had actually passed away on January 3rd that same year. And from financial reasons, her mom had recently had to move the family from their farm into town. And so anyways, when they see these two walk in, they're asking, "Hey, do y'all need a ride?" Charlie asked Jensen if he would drive him to the nearest phone. They pulled up to the Bennett service station, and Jensen told Charlie that he needed to go find the attendant to open up the phone booth. That's when Charlie pulled out his rifle and put it to the base of his head and told him to drive to Lincoln. At around 9 p.m., Charlie had Jensen stop his car about 50 feet from an old storm cellar. He shot Jensen in the back of the head. He tried to rape Caril. He tried really hard to rape her, but she put up so much of a fight that he wasn't able. He got mad and shot her too. So he admitted to shooting Jensen, but he claims that Caril shot the other Caril. I don't believe it because he tried to rape her, and I don't believe that she did.
Yeah, he's obviously on a spree.
Yes. Caril swore that she was in the car during the murders. She knew that they had been murdered.
Yeah.
But she says that she was in the car. Charlie and Caril got on the highway and headed toward Lincoln. Okay, so actually, this storm cellar, this all happened back at the Meyer farm. They went back, put them in the storm cellar at the Meyer farm where they had killed the farmer. Charlie and Caril got on Highway 2 and headed toward Lincoln and in Jensen's vehicle. While they were driving down the road, Caril threw several of Robert Jensen's school books out the window, and she said that she did that so that police would find them.
That actually is a little believable.
Yeah. She said she was leaving breadcrumbs. Not knowing where to go, they decided to try to make it to Washington to stay with Charlie's brother, Leonard, for a little while. They made it as far as Hastings, and then Charlie said he was just too tired to go on. So they turned the car back around and again headed for Lincoln. The police are never going to look for us there. At 3:19 a.m., a missing persons bulletin was broadcasted for Robert Jensen and Caril King, who'd been missing since 7:30 p.m. Charlie and Caril parked at this wealthy country club in Lincoln, where they ended up sleeping in their car until the next day. When they woke up, they drove around so that Charlie could look for a place to break into. He used to pick up trash in that neighborhood, and so he was pretty familiar with the residents and homes. He decided on the Ward residence, Chester Ward and his wife Clara. When they pulled up, Charlie told Caril to wait in the car. He walks up to the kitchen window and bangs on it with the butt of his rifle. And the Wards, they had a maid who was deaf. And so he told her to open up the door, and she did. She don't really know what's going on. He's barking orders at her, and then he finally realizes, oh, she doesn't understand what I'm saying. So he wrote instructions for her and told her to put the barking dog in the bathroom. A few minutes later, Clara Ward came out in her robe. She didn't have any idea what was going on, and she was made to sit at the table. Charlie then waved and told Caril, hey, come on in. And she went in and was given a cup of tea by the maid, and then she went into the library and went to sleep. Mrs. Ward and the maid, they went on and cleaned the house to pass the time.
But essentially are being hostages. Hostage in their home.
At around 11, Mrs. Ward served Charlie some breakfast in the library, and then she asked if she could go upstairs to change her shoes. About 45 minutes later, Charlie went upstairs to check on her because she hadn't come back down. When he came up, she fired at him with a .22 pistol, or he said she did. I'm not sure if that was ever proven or if she just pulled it out, but I do know that he pulled out a knife and threw it and hit her right in the back. Charlie took her to the bedroom, and then he walked downstairs and woke Caril up to give her a gun and told her that she needed to guard the maid. He went back and found Mrs. Ward trying to use the phone.
Hadn't he stabbed her in the back?
He had, but she wasn't dead. He couldn't get over there to her because the dog was in the way. And so he took the butt of his rifle and broke the dog's neck.
Wow, but maybe he was afraid of dogs.
I think so.
And that dog must have been doing a really good job of guarding her.
Yeah, I think so too. So then he tied Mrs. Ward up and left her on the bed. She doesn't live.
Because I'm wondering why he's tying her up.
Yeah, he tied her up. She was alive, but I think she bled out. Charlie ransacked the upstairs bedroom, and when the paper came that afternoon, he's looking through it, of course, cutting out different articles before he let Caril have it. Caril then cut out pictures of herself and Charlie from the paper, along with photos of her family. At 6 p.m., Mr. Ward arrived home and was confronted by Charlie in the kitchen. They struggled, and Mr. Ward was thrown down into the basement. Charlie ran down, and after another struggle, Mr. Ward runs back upstairs, only to be shot in the back by Charlie. Charlie didn't bother trying to clean up, but he did try dyeing his hair black with shoe polish.
I don't know. I think people did dye their hair with that.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, I think that was not an uncommon thing.
Somebody at work today told me that Miss Tan, she said she used motor oil.
Oh, that would give you a nice glow.
I was like, okay.
Never heard of that.
But afterwards, he and Caril brought the maid upstairs and tied her up in the bedroom. What happened next? Nobody really knows for sure because, once again, conflicting stories. Charlie swore that he didn't even know that the maid was dead. He said this after he was captured. So he said that Caril had to have been the one to have killed her because he did not. But Caril testified that she was downstairs and Charlie stabbed the maid to death. We do know that around 7 p.m., Charlie and Caril left the Ward home in their 1956 Packard. They got on Highway 34 and headed for Washington State. The same day, 35 Lincoln police officers, deputy sheriffs, I don't know how many of them, and state troopers surrounded the Meyer farm after some of the neighbors had spotted Charlie's black 1949 Ford in the mud. 30 armed farmers had also showed up. They fired off tear gas bombs and threw them in just about every window. They realized they're not in the house. And then they have troopers and stuff that are searching the property. One yelled out because he had found the frozen body of August Meyer in the wash house. A fellow farmer and friend of August looked around and just on an intuition, he checked out the storm cellar, and he was the one who found the bodies of Robert Jensing and Caril King. The local hardware store sold out of ammunition, guns, and knives because everybody was scared.
Yeah, and out for blood at this point, I'm sure.
For sure. That afternoon, first-degree murder charges were taken out against both Charlie Starkweather and Caril Fugate. But at the time, nobody knew for sure if Caril was even still alive. They were not 100% sure about her situation.
If she was willingly with him or being forced.
Exactly. Yeah. January 29th, on a Wednesday, Charlie and Caril crossed the line into Wyoming. Fred Ward, Mr. Ward's cousin and business associate, had stopped by and found the bodies of his cousin, his cousin's wife, and their maid. The governor called over 200 National Guard to start patrolling Lincoln in Jeeps with mounted M60 machine guns. They're going all over the place. Roadblocks were set up everywhere. Citizen snipers are on rooftops throughout the town. It was crazy.
Surely Charlie realizes he's not getting out of this.
Oh, I think he absolutely did know. He wanted to go down in a blaze of glory. He said he knew he was going to die, and I think he wanted to take her with him.
He must have.
Charlie and Caril were driving through Douglas, Wyoming at about 1 p.m. They were listening to the radio, and Charlie actually starts to get nervous because he's seeing everybody staring at his vehicle. They turn around, get on 87 towards Casper. At about 2:30 in the afternoon, about 15 miles outside of Douglas, he stops his car and drives past this Buick that was on the other side of the road. He got out, walked over to the Buick, and knocked on the window. He woke up a man named Merle Collison. He told him, "Hey, open up the door." Charlie walks back over to his car, got his .22 pump rifle, went back over to the Buick, and started firing through the window. Then Charlie told Caril to get in the back of the Buick, and he tried to release the handbrake, but it didn't work. And so this man named Joe Sprinkle was traveling east toward Douglas when he passed the two vehicles, and it just looked weird, looked wrong. And so he decided, I'm going to turn around, maybe help. I don't know, not exactly sure what to do. But when he got out of the vehicle and started over towards Charlie, he could see that Charlie had a rifle in his hand, and he turns around and tells Sprinkle, "Hey, I need you to help me release this brake." As he got closer, he noticed that Caril was crying, sobbing in the back seat of the car, and he could see Merle Collison's body in the front seat. So within seconds, he grabs for Charlie's gun, and they fall. And this Wyoming deputy sheriff just happens to be driving by. He pulls over, and Caril runs from the Buick straight towards him. She got into his patrol car and starts telling him, "This is Charlie Starkweather." Just starts telling him all the things. And anyways, Charlie, he still gets in the car, tries to run, doesn't get too far because they ended up shooting a .38. They shot some of the glass out of the windows, and he gets cut in the ear. That terrifies him.
He probably saw the blood and thought he had been hit.
Exactly. So he actually gets out of the car, lays on the ground, and gets arrested.
Huh.
Crazy. He gets handcuffed and taken to Douglas County Jail. He did ask the cops to loosen the handcuffs, or he told him he wasn't going to tell him nothing. And then he told him not to be rough on Caril because she didn't have anything to do with any of it. They took Caril to jail too, She told them that she'd been held hostage, that she had seen all 9 murders, and that statement almost destroyed her case in court because she later testified that she was unaware of her family's death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her story changed.
Mm-hmm. The sheriff's wife, Hazel, took care of her and put her in the cell for women upstairs. And they say that she was in shock. She couldn't refuse to speak. She didn't want anybody to touch her. She didn't let the doctor examine her. She was finally sedated. At first, Wyoming didn't want to give Charlie up because he killed somebody in Wyoming too. But they didn't have the death penalty at the time, right? Nebraska would. And so they were actually happy to turn him over to Nebraska, where they knew that he would probably get the death penalty. So they were immediately returned to Nebraska. Caril said that she had no idea what she was signing. And Charlie signed because he said he didn't like the smell of gas and he thought that was Wyoming's form of capital punishment.
My goodness.
He refused to fly back to Nebraska because he was scared of planes. And so he was driven. When one of the officers asked, "Why did you kill so many people?" he said, "I always wanted to be a criminal, but just not this big a one."
Man.
They said that most of the officers who drove him were surprised at how easygoing he was. Okay, so Elmer Scheel, he is the prosecutor. And when he met Charlie, he said, "My name's Elmer Scheel, and I'm going to do my damnedest to put you in the electric chair." And Charlie smiled at him and actually really liked and respected him. During court, he would refer to him as his best friend. There is when he told them, "Oh, hey, by the way, I killed the 21-year-old gas station attendant." Now, Scheel, he didn't like the fact that Charlie was saying Caril was innocent because he was dead set that she wasn't. Charlie, he made 4 statements. They all contradicted each other. Most of them, he said that she was innocent. Convicting Charlie was going to be easy. That was not going to be hard. And my gosh, he was practically helping him do it. But he wasn't just after him. He wanted her too. But back in 1958, things were a lot different when it came to handling suspects. She was 14 years old and no lawyer, no family, no phone call. The cops and prosecutors would question as much as they wanted for as long as they wanted before they were ever allowed to speak to an attorney or anybody else for that matter. She was actually kept in a mental hospital. It was sad. She did get a visit from her biological dad and her sister. And so that was really interesting. This is how much, what an idiot he is. While they were on the run, of course, they're interviewing her family. So the newspaper interviewed William Fugate. And he was like, "I hope they get him, even if they have to get her too." What? It was just, it was just weird. Caril Fugate's lawyer seemed to genuinely care about her. He seemed to be a good man. Even Scheel respected him.
Yeah.
Because he was just a good guy. So anyway, if the cops wanted information, they got it one way or another. So this is actually what this is what Scheel, a guy that worked with Scheel, said. He said, "We sensed that we could get Charlie to talk. And so he said that they decided they were going to bring some stuff to Charlie's attention that Caril was saying about him in order to get him to testify against her. And we could do that because he was our witness." They would say, "Oh, she says that she's calling you this. She's, they were really like manipulating things."
Yeah.
At Charlie Starkweather's trial, it came first, and there was no question he was just not right in the head. Through the trial, he acted like the county sheriff and the attorney were his best friends. He was actually calling them his buddies and his best pals. And they hated him. They were trying to get him. Yeah. It was just weird.
That's definitely strange.
Now, his defense attorney was trying to prove that he was insane. And to Charlie, that was just like the biggest insult.
Oh, really?
He was like, I'm not insane. Of course, the jury didn't have to think too hard. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He would go on to be the last person executed in Nebraska for a long time because not long after that, reforms put a hold on executions for 20 years. Before they strapped him into the electric chair, though, Charlie was the state's star witness against Caril. Her lawyer would say that the first time he saw her, she was a terrified kid that weighed barely 85 pounds, an 8th grader.
Wow.
At that moment, an orphan. Her mother, stepfather, and baby sister were gone. They were murdered. He said that he tried to calm her down and to get her to trust him. And eventually she did. Her story was simple and straightforward. This was not a Bonnie and Clyde situation. She was with him because she was forced to be. Her lawyer said that when the cops took her statements, that they weren't just asking questions, they were shaping her answers. He said that they would have her go everything like in detail at first without a reporter in the room. And they would take notes. And then they would go over it again and again. And only after that, they'd call in the shorthand reporter. But this time, they asked certain questions and left other things out. Caril thought she was just repeating herself, going back over the story and what she'd already said. But in reality, the final statement could be made to look however the cops wanted it to look. Mm-hmm. So they controlled the questions. They got they controlled what they recorded. And at the end, they controlled the narrative.
Yeah.
So despite maintaining her innocence, Caril Fugate was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison for her role in the Starkweather murder spree. Now, she was not basically, she was charged by, how during the commission of a felony, if a murder is...
Yes.
So that was the technicality that she got charged on.
Because the murders happened during the committing of a felony, so now that can be a capital crime.
And because he told her to hold the gun on the maid.
Yes.
And she did.
Okay.
And she admitted that she did.
Yeah.
That's how she got charged with first degree. That's the technicality. Now, they said if she was not convicted on that, they said they would have brought her up on murder for Caril King. But I don't think she would have been able to have been. No, I don't think if she had been tried for this today, that she would even be found guilty at all.
Really?
No, I don't. I'll just tell you, there was no evidence. They were taking Charlie Starkweather's word for everything.
Yeah.
The prosecution pointed to evidence that she did have opportunities to escape, which she did. Mm-hmm. She said, too, that he had a gun on her most of the time and that she believed her family was in danger. So she didn't say the Stockholm thing. She didn't say I did it because I loved them. She said, I didn't want my family killed.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to look at both sides of that coin there. Even if he didn't have the gun on her the whole time, she had already seen what he was capable of.
Right.
So there was probably enough fear there.
Yes, exactly. But in the end, the jury did not buy her story. They didn't believe she was a hostage. And I don't know. I'm torn on that because I don't think she had any part in her family's murder. I think she was a 14-year-old girl. She was scared. I do believe that. And there was evidence of that, like toward the end for sure. I think he wanted her to die with him. I don't think she wanted that. She was confused. She probably, if she loved him, if she didn't really break up with him, but there was evidence indicating that she did break up with him. And I think that's why he went over there. He was mad, and that's why he killed the family. He made it like, have you ever seen the movie Natural Born Killers?
I've heard of it. I have not seen it, but I knew it was based on
that. Was one of my favorite movies when I was younger, which is sick now when I look at that because I loved that movie. He made it like she wanted him to stab her sister.
Like she was driving him.
Yeah,
and
like
pushing
he pushed the whole thing. Like he wanted to turn himself in. And she was like, no, we're not giving up. You're not giving up. But that certainly isn't how it looked. And she didn't know, like when that guy was there and saw her crying, she didn't know a cop was going to drive up. So that wasn't just because a policeman drove up that she was
just theatrics.
No, it wasn't. I do believe she knew that her family was dead, though, by that point, because they found there were newspaper articles in her pocket.
I think she had to have known before she left that house. You're there for 4 days, holed up in the house. You had to have known that.
Right. And there's a possibility that she went along with some of it in the beginning.
That's where I'm falling on this spectrum. I feel like she did go along with it at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then before she realized that she was caught up in all of this brutal murders, and by the time she realized she wanted out, it was too late.
And I do think she loved her mom and her sister. There was evidence of that. And she might have came home from school and that had been done. And I don't know, just this being scared, and she did care for him, and she's 14. I don't know. There's just a lot of things that can happen when your frontal lobe is not fully developed. She was a kid. Or she could have just gone along with the whole thing, and to her it could have been like a Bonnie and Clyde situation. But I will say that there is zero evidence of that.
Okay, so that's interesting, because the spin that I've always heard on that was that she did go. You know what I'm saying?
And that was a popular narrative for a long time.
Yeah. So to me, to look at it at a different angle is, now I'm going to have to ponder that. When I go back and listen to this in retrospect, I'm going to have so many comments that I'm going to wish I had said.
Right.
But I'm going to have to process it first, because this is the first time I've heard this angle.
He definitely wanted her to die with him. He thought that she would get the chair too. He didn't care that she was going to lose her life. I think he wanted them both to go down in a blaze of glory. Mm-hmm. It's just hard for me to really understand where her head was. I'm not 100% sure.
He may have really wanted that Bonnie and Clyde moment.
And she may have thought that sounded cool and romantic in the beginning. And then it got real. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I do know that any time that she would go somewhere and go to sleep, or anytime anybody saw her, it was like she wasn't like holding a gun or cheering him on. And the things that she did, she had freely admitted that he had made her hold the gun on the maid.
She was 14, but how old was he?
He was 20 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. And so until he got mad at her, though, he was like, his story would almost completely line up with hers. And then when he got mad at her, then it changed to she was just this horrible aggressor. In the end, though, did not believe that she was a hostage. And with that, Caril was sentenced at 15 years old to life at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. After serving 18 years behind bars, being a model prisoner, working in that Nazarene church, they would allow her to walk into town and come back. She wasn't supposed to have that privilege because of her sentence, but because she was so trustworthy, and she never broke that trust either. She always did what she was supposed to do. She always came back. She could have been out years earlier if she would have admitted her guilt, but she would not. The prisoners would be like, "You're crazy. Just say you did it." And she would be like, I can't. I didn't. She got saved while she was in prison. And then, like I said, she worked for the Nazarene church. I think they had like a child care center. And at first it was a big deal within the church if they were going to let her do that, which I completely understood. But they said that she was amazing at it. The kids loved her. She loved the kids. She was granted parole on June 20th of 1976. And outside, she was still pretty famous, and she ended up changing her name. They ended up making a movie, The Badlands, about those crimes. And of course, it made her look really bad.
Yeah.
She relocated to Lansing, Michigan, where she worked as a janitorial assistant and a nanny before she eventually retired. She married in 2007 Frederick Clare, machinist who also worked as a weather observer for the National Weather Service. The two of them lived in Hillsdale, Michigan, where she just wanted to stay out of the spotlight. His son said she was awesome.
Wow.
He said she was just a good woman, good to her dad, just good to his dad, a good woman. But in 2013, on August 5th, Caril and her husband were involved in a vehicle crash where their SUV turned, and he died. She survived, but she was horribly injured. And the police actually came around. That's how we know that the son really liked her, because they interviewed him and was like, do you know any reason why she would want to murder your father? And he was like, she wouldn't want to murder my father. He was like, she is not the woman that you think she was. In February of 2020, she petitioned the Nebraska Board of Pardons to please clear her name. She argued that a pardon would help alleviate the burden of being known as a convicted killer. Even some relatives of the victims supported that, but the board denied her. And that is her story.
Wow.
Yeah. So tell me any of your thoughts.
I've just always heard this with the spin of her being guilty. So I'm sitting here thinking, could she have been a hostage that whole time? I do think it holds weight that she was so young.
Yes.
And I don't want to make excuses, but at that age, it's just easy to get caught up in things, not realizing where they're leading until they're there.
Yes. I do think she was devastated about her family. Maybe when it set in. Do you know what I'm saying? Because I think she knew about it. I think she lied about not knowing about it. I don't think she knew when it happened. I don't think she was there when it happened. I think that she learned about it. And
just what a horrible tragedy all the way around.
Yeah.
And just all those lives that were taken for no good reason. That just meanness, evil.
Yeah.
He was really something else. What a horrible, he went on that spree. He had no compassion. It's hard to just grapple with that level of evil, but it was evil.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And loved his family. It's weird. That's not common. Usually killers hate their families.
Yeah, you did say earlier, you were talking about how he really loved his mom, but I had a thought then, like a lot of times we see somebody doing such monstrous deeds like this, that they either have a mom who has doted on them and spoiled them rotten. You've pointed that out many times. Or we see that they have this problem and they hate women.
Yes.
They hate their mothers. They hate women. They have issues with that, like that. But it didn't sound like he had either of those things going on. So you're like, what in the world?
He wasn't spoiled. The mom let the dad discipline him. He seemed to have kind of a balance. I'm not saying his dad wasn't sometimes mean back in the day. Dads were just rough. Even from his point of view, he loved his childhood.
So, that makes me think there's got to be more to the story than what. Right. I mean, there are movies, there are books, there's court records, all that stuff, and that trial and all the transcripts. But there has to be something else that you don't see. Because how else was he formed into this monster? Or was he just literally born this way?
I mean, he seems to think it was the bullying. I don't know, though. I know so many people who are bullied and they don't want to kill people. But again, you see a lot of them who do. Yeah. A lot of these school shooters.
Yeah. So there's got to be something in you that allows that to turn you into that, because there's so many people who are bullied that never go out and make those choices. So there was definitely an element of, I don't know, hard-heartedness there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.